Okay, everybody, I guess recording started, Shobit?
Yep, we're recording.
Fantastic. So welcome everybody to this month's Los Angeles Revit user group. We're here with Jeremy Harkin, who's on screen. And Jeremy, put on your mask for everybody. I think it would be nice to show that we were just conversing while we were hooking up. And yeah, I thought my mask was taking care of business, but it clearly isn't. Awesome. Thank you, Jeremy. Jeremy Harkins is from Ineni Realtime. I'm going to bypass any of my normal ranting about people and modeling and trying to do better, because I really just want to give Jeremy as much time as possible. And we're going to be monitoring the questions. So if you have questions, please, or comments, we will feed them to Jeremy throughout and or at the end. So without further ado, let me switch clumsily. This is the edit part, so awesome to that. Where's the video? There it is. So to set up a little context, I'd like to play a video. So here it goes.
So can people hear me?
Yeah, everybody should be able to hear you.
Oh, great. So maybe I'll start talking. So look, I just wanted to start, hi everyone, Jeremy Harkins in Ineni Realtime. Just wanted to maybe start with this little video just to give you some context of what I'm going to be talking about. It's a fairly long presentation. It's a lot of information to get through. It's dense. It covers a heap of ideas. And so I just wanted to, I guess, give you some context of this is what it all relates to. So I'm going to essentially cover some philosophy and some theory first about why and how I think what I'm going to be talking about makes sense. Then I'll show you some real examples, so essentially some of our work. And then I'll come back to the productivity issue, which I think is the core problem in our industry. And I guess I'm in line with Jay very much so. I can rant a rave about we got to do things better. And in a sense, that's what this entire presentation is really about. And I think that there's a really simple way that we can do things better. So look, that's probably a pretty good context. Oh, maybe one final thing. The missing half of BIM OI, it was essentially a bit of a joke, or tried to be, where I've essentially just sliced the BIM in half, and BIM is the bottom section of BIM. Didn't really work. But anyway, it'll make sense as I go through this thing. So without further ado, maybe it's time to switch over to my presentation and slides. Do I share, or how do I do this?
You got him, Shobit?
Can I start sharing screen? Aha, excellent. Awesome, thank you. Great, the missing half of BIM, OI, or just the bottom half of BIM, really. So I'm going to talk about a bunch of things today, and it's mainly around virtual environments, but really it's also about productivity. And for me, it really starts with this graph. So this is a bit of a graph released by McKinsey's at the end of last year, and it's showing essentially productivity across the US. So compared to other industries, so you can see quite clearly all other industries go up in productivity as while we go down. And there's lots of different interpretations for this data, but for me, it's actually showing one really clear thing. And what it's showing is that when we apply a solution as an individual with technology, we get some type of net productivity gain in every other industry other than construction. When we apply a technological solution in our industry, we lose productivity. Now, what I find really interesting is you can kind of see it right here. And now this point in time is about when we started using CAD, or computer-aided design. So very interestingly, it seems like as soon as we started using the technology, which we all agree with, because we're all BIM guys in a sense, we started losing productivity in our industry. And that's what I read from this. There are other interpretations, so you know, take this with a grain of salt, but it's what I've essentially picked up from this. And for me, this is the problem. quite clearly 100% across the board. If our industry doesn't fix this, well, we don't have an industry. Now, one little thing that I want to point out is that overall, when you combine all industries, we seem to go up. So maybe there's some other way to interpret this data which doesn't put us essentially at the bottom. Now, interestingly, I tried to look for other data similar to this from other places in the world, and this is the Australian version of this. So in the Australian version, construction goes up. So productivity in the Australian market seems to go up. Now, this is contrary to what the American data is showing, but I see a subtle difference in these two studies. And what is the subtle difference is silos. So the Australian study is essentially looking at the siloed industry of Australia. And it's true. When you look at an individual, this is us, essentially. We're really productive across the board against any other person in any other industry. We work like crazy, and we do a lot, and we apply solutions, and we are actually individually very productive. It's just globally or in silos, when you add it all up, it seems to be not the case. So that's, to sum it up quite simply, in the current business climate, productivity equals technology. So when we apply technology, we get some type of productivity outcome, except in our industry, apparently. So that's some context, and I'll come back to that at the end of the presentation or after I've shown some content, because I think it's really important about how we approach design, I guess, or construction in the industry. But now I'm going to move into essentially what I do. So what is the value of virtual space? And the value of virtual space is really arbitrary. If you think about the value of virtual space, what I find the value of virtual space to be is very different than the value of physical space. If you think about a site, so a single site, say, constraints and so forth, the value of that is essentially property value. How much can you sell that land for in the future? And it has constraints. It's a set thing. I can build up, I can build down. I can't really build out because the site has those borders or those boundaries. Now, virtual space is really different. If I make a virtual site that represents a real site, I can actually extend virtually in any direction in forever. I can make an entire world in that one tiny site. So the bounds or the boundaries of virtual space are fundamentally different than physical space. And that fundamental difference for me really comes down to data. So if you think about a physical site, the boundaries are essentially site boundaries. When you think about a virtual site, the sites are essentially bandwidth and data. How much information can I flow through a single environment? And that represents or is equivalent to the site constraints of a physical site. Bit of an abstract concept, but it kind of starts pulling out that how much information or what is the value of virtual stuff. And it's not a block of land, it's a block of data, simply. So when we think about kind of virtual reality or virtual space, at the moment, it's a very confusing landscape. We have lots of different realities, all the realities, in fact. There's, and they keep coming out: real reality, mixed reality, reality, hybridized virtual reality, reality virtual. There's a million of them. My favorite is actually augmented virtuality, but because I guess that's what I believe in. But quite simply, this has been thought about for a long time, and since I think 1994, it actually goes way further back. There's been this concept of the mixed reality continuum. And it puts real at one end and virtual at the other end. It's really simple. Augmented reality falls in there and virtual reality falls in there. And essentially all the realities just fall somewhere in this continuum. To make it look a little prettier, it looks somewhat like this. We have real here. Augmented reality is essentially adding some 3D content or some virtual content to reality. Mixed reality is square in the middle. You start getting to augmented virtuality. And this is interesting to me because this is where we start augmenting our virtual environment or our real environment with content from the real world. So it's essentially the digital twins that we're talking about now, where we can start overlaying real information in our virtual environment in a reverse loop, if you like. And then virtual reality at the far end, a complete immersive experience. So that's, I guess, the realities, and that's our space. When I think about our company, what we do in this space is we empower people through the use of virtual environments to create change in the real world. So for us, virtual environments aren't just about doing things or showing information. It's actually about changing people's behaviors long term in how we actually interact with spaces. And the difference that we've got to with virtual space is this idea of interface, is this idea of kind of user control, user experience and intuitive control. It's something fundamental to virtual space that we never really had before kind of our current paradigm. And this leads clearly into the concept of digital twins. When I present, usually I'd ask some questions now, and I would ask the big question of who has heard of a digital twin? I'm sure you'd all say I have. But where we are at the moment is it's kind of become the, I guess, the new kid on the block, this idea that we can have a virtual model to control in real time our building long term. I kind of equate it to the BMW, this idea that I can sit in my car and the BMW completely shifts and adjusts itself to me. And that's what the digital twin is supposedly supposed to be doing for us in this new kind of virtual world that we're moving towards. I argue that every building has had a digital twin for a long time. It's just that we really do underutilize the digital twin. In a sense, this is a digital twin, or just 2D CAD back in the 70s was really a digital twin. It was a representational model, a very underdeveloped, not lifelike representational model, but it was still a digital twin. This is kind of our current digital twin. This is, as I'm sure a lot of you will recognize, a nice view of Revit. What I find really interesting about this view is that we as professionals understand what we're looking at here. If you show this to your clients or someone who hasn't been trained to understand 3D information and virtual technologies at all, this is actually a really confusing image. The first thing that they do is they can't even tell you whether they're looking from the bottom or the top. It takes them a long time to actually kind of rationalize what they're saying. So what is BIM anyway? And for me, BIM is really a dichotomy. BIM is two things. It's data and visuals. And the visual side of it has been kind of left in the past, in my opinion. That we came up with this concept many years ago, VDC, virtual design and construct, call it what you will, there's a million names for it. And it was really the interrelation of object-oriented modeling, this idea of data at the base, and a visual way to see that information. And that was great. And for us, I think as an industry, it allowed us to do a lot of things. But what it's led to is it's led to essentially data becoming more important. And where I've come to now, and this is, I guess, my background in visual technologies, is this concept of the Uncanny Valley. I would also ask at this point who's heard of this. Hopefully a bunch of you have. If you haven't, I'll give you a quick explanation. The Uncanny Valley comes from robotics, and it's a really simple concept in that we like things when they're real, and we like things as they approach real. So it looks like this. Here's real. As things kind of go up, we kind of like them more and more until they become almost real, and then we hate them, and that's the Uncanny Valley. And then it comes out of it. In robotics, it looks something like this. So not creepy. We like R2-D2. He's a robot. He's a representation. We clearly understand him. Again, not creepy. Even though it's a personification, it's still far enough from reality that we understand it to not be real. As soon as we get to something like this, we start getting skin tone. We start getting things that actually could be real. And it starts creating emotional responses in us. And then we get to these kind of, the Japanese robots that kind of look at us really strangely. And from across the room, they are real. It's only when we actually interact with them that we get disturbed, a very deep and horrible disturbance about the fact that this thing is not real. It's not until we reach reality again that we actually start liking it. I argue in the construction industry, we're essentially here. So we are squarely in the Uncanny Valley in all of our models. And what this is doing is it's actually creating senses of revulsions in our clients. And it's unknown, it's subtle. They're not going to tell you that they hate your stuff because it's not really a scary thing. It's just you're actually creating negative emotions about the content they're looking at. And that relates to your design output. So we look at this same concept in kind of drawings or representation. It looks something like this. We like a sketch. It looks really good. It makes sense. We like a kind of a wireframe diagram because, again, it's just a representation and it clearly shows information. As soon as we get to something like this, it starts getting creepy. So this idea that kind of colors are strange. And then we get to like kind of the Navisworks model. And it actually doesn't really have much relationship to reality. And for most people looking at this, unless you're trained, it's actually very confusing. And then you kind of come back to reality, or this point where you kind of step out of it to kind of visualization, this idea that things are real. And our clients love this stuff. Our clients, and I'm sure if I could ask the question and have the conversation with you all now, our clients want more visualization. Every time you see them, if you can give them a beautiful image, they're happy. However, it's too expensive. We never really actually get there. Because you do one every 3 months, one every 6 months, it costs you a few $1,000s. If you want to do a really good one, maybe lots and lots of thousands of dollars. If you want to do an interactive virtual environment, probably hundreds of thousands of dollars. And it's actually just it's just not viable. It's not feasible in the project budget and timelines and so forth. So what we do is we fall back to this. We take all of our great content and we make it look like crap, really. And this is a classic image. I'll give you a really good example. So this is a real world example. These stairs, which we can all see, the little green stairs, this was shown as a model to essentially get in approval to next stage executives in the room, so forth. The first question that was asked in the room was, why are the stairs green? And it's not, obviously the answer was because green represents steel and it's just the color, don't worry about it. And it was smoothed out and moved on. But there was a negative impression, and it actually leads to a distrust or a lack of confidence in what you're doing, because it doesn't relate to your client's real world interpretation of that data. They see stairs and they should be steel, not green. And they understand that it's a representation, but there's no need to show it. Versus something like this to a client, this idea of immersion, and you actually bypass the whole question of why are the stairs green. They don't ask why the stairs are green because they're not. It's no longer a representation that they need to learn. It's just obvious and linked to their expectations. So that's essentially the output. And this is where we're kind of heading with all of this stuff. Now, to do this in our world, we use game technology, and I'm sure you're all aware of Unity and Unreal and game engines, and Autodesk's attempt at their game engine. Everyone has a game engine basically, and the reason is that they do stuff really well. They actually do 3D just so much better than our industry, in a sense that it's a bit of a disjoint. Well, and I take that back. Our industry does informative 3D very well. It doesn't do immersive, interactive 3D very well. This idea that you want to take a 14-year-old boy with ADHD who has the attention span of a gnat and have them sit there for 10 hours playing a video game straight. That's immersion. That's what video games have essentially kind of led us to be able to do, to be able to engage people beyond the underlying data to the actual content and the immersion. What's interesting about video games is that they're expensive, very expensive to make. So Call of Duty, for instance, the image you just looked at, which is not a photograph, it's an image. If your kids play it, I'm sure you've probably seen it, but it cost $250 million to make. Interestingly, it was only 50 million of that in the actual production. 200 million of that was in the advertisement, the marketing of it, putting it out there, getting it out there for everyone to see. And this is something that we don't do in our industry. So for us, if you look at the cost of a building, marketing, maybe 2%, maybe 3%, 5% if you're really lucky. But in reality, marketing is just a bit of an afterthought in our industry. Yet we're selling some of the most expensive single products in the entire world. It begs the real question about, what is this for? What are our buildings for? Are they for the building, or are they for the people who interact with over time? And in a sense, the entertainment industry has nailed that, where our industry hasn't. It's just an interesting thing. The other aspect of video games is the idea of the interface. Is that there's a link between digital space and physical space. So a video game controller is the most fundamental, or a touch screen, if you like, that I can start interacting with that content at an underlying, in some underlying way. And it kind of leads us to what is the future of interfaces. And we all know it's not actually a question. We've known it for a long time. We've been watching movies with this stuff that show us exactly the types of things that we're going to be seeing. What we want to do, we want to grab our model, do a little change, kind of throw it over to Jay. He does a change, he throws it back to me, I grab it. And we want it to be so intuitive, I don't have to think about the technology anymore. In fact, it's one of my biggest issues with BIM is that in order to learn BIM, it's hard. It takes time, it takes effort. Where what these kind of technologies and movies suggest is that the interaction side of it, the piece where I actually kind of do the really complicated things, happens intuitively. It happens in the background. And it just leads me to actually allows me to, I guess, interact with my design thinking rather than to battle with technological solutions. What it looks like currently, quite now, is something more like this. This is what we want. This is what we get. We get a geek, essentially. And don't get me wrong, I'm a geek too, but some guy who actually understands the underlying technology well enough to implement it in a way that works for them. And this is implemented with 2D screens and a keyboard. So our real thinkers in design space never actually get to interact with this technology, or at least not yet, maybe not for another 5 or 10 years, because our smart people haven't rationalized to them in a really intuitive way. And the other part of all of this, and this is an entire course, a whole discussion, and this also comes from robotics, is this idea of reality gap. There's this thing, a BIM model is only ever a representation. And while we understand that inherently, I don't think our clients necessarily do. And so what we need to do is we need to better show our clients the reality gap between the final product and what we're actually trying to create during that process. And so that's our digital product, this thing that doesn't actually fully describe reality. It only describes reality enough for us to be able to build a thing. And so we have to really consider that reality gap when we're interacting with our clients. And it's really not until we kind of get to things like retinal imaging displays and kind of laser plasma holography, kind of new technologies which can take 3D content out of a screen and start really putting it in our environment, and not just kind of the HoloLens type kind of 3D environment, which is still screen based, but actually real 3D content kind of floating in space. So we'll start actually kind of getting out of that reality gap. But however, I guess there is an interim period where we can use screens in an intelligent way to, I guess, smooth that gap. The other thing with all of this for me is this idea of virtual space. And I think it's something that's not really being explored enough yet. Virtual space is the first time we've had a new architectural medium in thousands of years. The ability to be able to link two spaces together virtually, Sydney and New York, through a virtual wall. Portals. There's ways that we can start to kind of playing with virtual space, and that's again a whole other lecture, which kind of leads into are we really using our technology well enough for design realization, or are we just using it to make a building? I argue that we're basically using our technology to make buildings at the moment. We're not very much playing with architectural space or virtual space. The only people playing with that space are Google, Microsoft, and games companies. They're the ones that are actually really experimenting in this new medium of what virtual space actually is. And I think that's a bit of a lost opportunity for our entire industry. And this, I guess, is all predicated on this idea of this VR, AR industry. And honestly, it's a massively confusing space at the moment. There's a million different headsets, there's a million different outputs, phones, cameras, devices, you name it. You need so much knowledge to essentially get there. And as the end user, this is what we expect. We want it to be like me standing on a mountaintop where I feel the cold wind in my face and the eagle kind of, kind of above me, soaring around, and I can get, yes, I'm very immersed in the experience. The reality is something more like this. I put on a headset at the moment, someone coughs behind me. 3D models don't really work very well, and I get a little bit sick because the frame rate isn't particularly good. And so there's this kind of pushback, at least from our clients, on technology, on VR in a sense, because we haven't actually achieved what's the expectation. So you're using technology, I guess, without understanding the expectation. And the core of this is virtual environments, essentially taking the model, the BIM, and so forth, and making it into something which the clients can engage with and understand. And what's more, maybe making it useful so we can start overlaying information in a clear and kind of concise way. The other aspect of it is this idea of contextual controls. It allows us to contextualize and interact with the virtual information in a way that we can't with the real world. So going to move on to some case studies now, just to show where this comes from. So I've got a lot here. Not sure how we're doing on time, about halfway through, which is good. So I'll keep going. So I'm going to show a few different things here. Yep.
Jeremy?
Yeah.
This is Jay. How you doing, everybody? I guess I should mask up. Shoot, I'm sorry. Is my mask on straight? I like it like this, much better. So just to give a little break and let you catch your breath and me, because there's a lot in there. Yeah.
Very.
And I want to just kind of ask either a segue here in the middle, since it's a nice middle part, because the next bit is pretty astonishing. It's awesome. But early on, if you're going to get into this more deeply later, get into it then. If not, let's talk.
Okay.
You mentioned that, and it kind of went by maybe a lot of people. I didn't hear anything from the audience. That's a joke. They're on listen only mode. So you mentioned that our industry is primarily the generator of these efficiencies, and we have helped pretty much, arguably, of course. We may even have a presentation, a discussion on just this with some more key players around the world. But you mentioned that, you know, our industry is generating all these ideas and all of these processes and efficiencies, and every other industry is reaping the benefits, and we're the only ones that aren't. So if you're going to get into that more, let's do it then. If not, what the fuck?
I do. I'll come back to that. So yeah, so look, I agree. So that's actually, I think, core to the productivity things. I touched on it very, very lightly at the start, but for me, actually, that's the core of the whole thing. Is that what this essentially boils down to is that we're not capturing the value that we're generating for the world. So it's pretty clear. So it's that we, and I'll come back to this, but yeah, quite simply, what it is that we are essentially the design thinkers for the world, and that design thinking is of value. So that design thinking then spreads out to other industries which gain benefits from that design thinking, yet we don't ever. So it's kind of like an IP argument almost, where IP essentially allows kind of ideas to get profit, to put it simply. Design thinking isn't protected. So a little bit of design thinking can go a long way, as we know. So I'll come back to why and some of the challenges around that after I show some examples.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So yeah, because I'd rather show some examples first, because let's contextualize why. Because if I start going into that too deeply, you're all going to think I'm crazy, and you're going to go, you don't know what you're talking about. You're an idealist who has zero sense about business and how we can actually get there. I disagree, and the examples I'm going to show now will actually start proving that.
Awesome.
Okay, cool.
It's yours.
Okay, great. So, look, I'll start with Virtual Barangaroo, because Virtual Barangaroo was essentially our first project. So our company started about 8 years ago. And, oh, can you see my window there? Oh no, what's going on here?
I see the image of Virtual Barangaroo.
Okay, you do? Let's see if it starts up once it loads. So just for some context, so we started about 8 years ago, and this was at a point when BIM was, starting to get used. So can you see that of the virtual environment now? Oops.
It's switching over to your presentation right now. Could be just a lag.
Yeah, is that better?
Now, right now I see your PowerPoint.
Oh, okay, so something's gone wrong here. Hold on a second. Screen. There we go. Is that better?
That looks better.
Okay, great, excellent. So what you're seeing here is Virtual Barangaroo. So Virtual Barangaroo was started about 8 years ago or 7 years ago now, and it was it's fairly near the beginning of BIM for large scale projects, really. So Barangaroo was one of the first projects in Australia to mandate BIM across the entire site. So they wanted to do the whole thing and have a nice BIM model. And when I entered the conversation, they told me that they were going to give me a single master IFC file of the entire site. I'll just let that sink in for a second. Look at that site. For those
what you're not hearing is the excruciatingly laughing out loud.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So it's an absolute joke, because you understand the complexity, and like that IFC file would have probably been like about 14 gigabytes. I don't know, something stupid, and not a single program in the entire world would actually be able to open the thing, let alone be able to do anything with it. So they had some nice ideas, But in reality, I knew that the challenges they were facing essentially couldn't. So we came in, and what they also wanted to do was, beyond the BIM, which they had, they wanted to be a controller. So they kind of had a beautiful visualization, and someone at some bank somewhere with a very smart mind said, "Hey, could we use your BIM to control the buildings?" And Lendlease, or the main developer, went, "Yes, of course you can." No, you couldn't. Not back then anyway, or at least not kind of en masse, like in any real sense. But funnily enough, I guess from my background and my lecturing is that we could. So it actually came from this sense of how we kind of use information and data to flow through. And yeah, why not? We can link it up with your system and let you turn a light on or off. Easy. Easy to a point. So what we did was we essentially sucked in all of the information from about 14 different file types. So what I might do is actually just bring up a statistics page. Here we go. There we go. So can you see that at the moment? So here's some some basic information about this environment, Virtual Brain Guru. It's one common master environment. From this, we created 4 applications. There was Virtual Brain Guru, it's a PC kind of master application. There's Mobile Brain Guru. Virtual Brain Guru is really for client engagement, so leasing, things like that. Mobile Brain Guru, which was an iOS Android version of it. The alarms and live monitoring system, which was essentially your digital twin. So a fully integrated BIM model with the back-end systems, which allowed you to turn lights on and off, monitor, and so forth. And then a kind of interactive fit out for their main offices. What that actually looked like in terms.
You dropped out there, Jeremy. Not sure if it was just me. Can't hear you anymore. I'm guessing you're calling back in.
Yeah, he's having some audio difficulties.
Yep. So everybody just hang tight. Jeremy will click back on. We're going to leave this in the final edit. It's awesome. Hey, Shobit, right now, are you monitoring the questions?
Yep.
Because I can. All right, cool.
Hello?
There you are.
You're back.
You're back.
Sorry about that. My phone just hung up for some reason. Anyway, back. Cool.
Figured
Where was I? So yeah.
You were just at the beginning of talking about it.
Yep. So there was a range of there's about 14 different file types that we essentially had to use, all from different contractors, all in different formats. There was some all different. You can kind of see just the kind of cross section of type of things that we did. And this is essentially, I guess, one of our specialties is that ability to integrate different kind of design media. Essentially, I think it's what all of us do very well, but we did it quite well back then. For this particular environment, we built it on Unreal 4. If you know anything about polygons, the environment I'm showing you live at the moment has about 600 million polygons and is running off my laptop. So it's quite dense, if you like. There's a lot of information in there. So that's some basic statistics. In order to get there, in terms of
How in order to get there, quality control from all the other participants.
Quality control? What quality control? No, so look, and the reality is that the how we were aiming to use this and what Lendlease or what the developer really wanted to do with the information had never been considered at the outset. So the reality of the situation was that if you look at the original contracts, BIM, the entire BIM thing was essentially a single paragraph. So they hadn't really considered contractually how this stuff works. So what that looked like was you will provide your documentation in a BIM format. So we got BIM files from people that had 50 levels for a tower, and then a 2D drawing imported at the level for every tower. Is that a BIM model? excuse my, is that a BIM, I should say? It's not. So it was insane. So some of the things that we got, and what we ended up really doing, and we never got paid for this, was we did a quality assurance test on all of the contractor data that the developer had received. Because in order to make this thing, we had to essentially go review all of those BIMs and say, well, actually, what you have here is 2D plans, unrelated, imported into your levels, and no 3D modeling and no relationship. We had other files which were, they'd essentially done one typical floor and then copied that floor to every level, as we're prone to do, but they hadn't renamed everything. So we had 20 to 30,000 kind of ID conflicts. So, and this is, at that point in time, people hadn't thought about the need to have IDs kind of uniquely identified for 1 million assets in a building. Revit doesn't even think about it. In fact, it runs out of room, and that's why you have to start doing some tricky things, because their IDs aren't long enough, and they've never really fixed that issue. So there's some underlying issues with BIM and the data and how it all kind of links together, yeah, which were a huge issue. But we did it, and what that led to was the ability to do things like, you know, link it up to your program. So create an Excel file in your program, have it be real. That's essentially linked to your dates and times. Update your program, drop an Excel file in a folder, and be able to jump to any point in time to see what it's like. And so it starts being quite, you know, a deep model, but in a sense, it's not a single program. It's just a whole bunch of information kind of gathered together in a nice interface, really. So things are interactive, and long term, with this is the idea, is that those blinds or those shutters that I just opened are linked to the building management system. And so if they open in reality, they open here, and vice versa. I can go in and click that and actually open it. In the operational model, which I won't show you today because, you know, things change over time, but I can actually go in and turn a light off on level 14 right now. I would get in so much trouble I wouldn't even tell you, but I can do things like that. So, and we did this 7 years ago. And so this has been possible for a long time. This model specifically was really for design review. So we essentially took this model. It was for a bank which was going to be moving in. Funnily enough, the bank ended up having advertising outside, which was for another bank, a direct competitor. And it wasn't until the marketers saw the virtual model in relationship to the building information that they went, oh, wow, we can't do that because we're going to have the executive walk past advertising outside their new bank. So what happens in projects, I find, especially at this scale, is you actually start getting all these kind of generative things happen. So little kind of problems arise between that you don't see between silos, essentially. So this was the old bank that they were moving from. They were moving down the stairs across the road to their new bank. And so from this environment, after we'd essentially done all of the other pieces, oh no, that was a funny one. We were able to do a set of induction videos, which led to induction safety training and so forth. So this project has been a collection of about 35 contracts to date, all of different sizes, anywhere from a couple of $1,000s up to a couple $100,000. And it's all fed into a single virtual model, which over time has been realized. So 7 years, and we're still working on it. In fact, they just came back to us recently to do an update to a new area in it, because the model's already there. We already have all the information. So as opposed to visualization currently, which essentially is a bit of a, it kind of rapes the industry, and, you know, excuse the language, it's not very nice because you have to redo things. You have to re-render. So the reason we don't get a lot of visualization content is it's very intensive. Well, if we put that effort elsewhere and we make it into reusable content throughout the life of the building, what we end up with is the ability to get actually infinite amounts of rendering material. So from this, I think we've done 45 minutes of videos, literally thousands of rendered images, and a whole bunch of information. So look, that's that one. I'll try to move on because I'll run out of time.
Real quick, Jeremy?
Yep.
And by the way, the time is totally flexible, so you
okay,
feel comfortable for as little or as much as you want.
Okay.
Is the security of these connected projects a major issue or a big thought bucket for everybody involved?
Not in my opinion, not at all. Look, there's a really big thrust about kind of, you know, cybersecurity and all those types of things. I think there's some really simple approaches to kind of make this whatever. So with this project in particular, we removed we removed 3D content, which was sensitive. So for instance, the keystones of the buildings and how you could essentially place a bomb to bring the whole building down. That content was removed from the public models. So it's just not in them. In terms of the network we put this on, so there is a cloud version of it, but that again has very minimal data. So it's more of a data understanding about what we could put in those things, and the actual system was built on their local network. So this is running on a very powerful computer on their local network in a secure room, essentially. So look, cybersecurity is an issue, and obviously as you start integrating different data feeds and start kind of thinking about having your Facebook feeds flow into it and so forth, yeah, absolutely, you need to start thinking about some security concerns around this information. But it's no different than all of the security concerns already out there. In fact, one thing I feel with these things is if you link the right systems, you can visually see what your security concerns are instead of trying to guess at them. So.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, that's all right. Yeah, so look, I'll move on. So there's a whole bunch of examples here. And so, well, I guess what I'll show you is just some of them. So change management, that's, I guess, where we've actually found most of our engagement recently. So these models, they can do anything. And that's actually been one of our struggles as a business, is to go, hey, make us a model that does everything. And I was talking to Jay about this the other day. And you can make a $20,000 shack, and I can make you a $10 million digital twin of it. And that's the reality, is that this is how long is a piece of string? How much technology do you actually want in there? How much detail do you want to go to? Do you want me to define the actual fiber threads of the material on the couches? Which we can do, but that's going to be a lot of data, and it's probably really useless. Do you actually need to know where every bolt is for a building, or do you just need to see what it looks like? So there's a bit of a balance between information versus output. Change management, I guess, is where we find that gets the most traction, because it's where all of our technical stuff from our world actually butts up with a bunch of people that have zero technical information at all. So what we have to do at that point is we have to essentially remove everything technical. We've got to make the really smart look stupid, to put it simply. Virtual display homes and smart homes, that's another area that we've kind of got into a lot recently. That was in some of the videos that I think kind of were out there. This is your pretty standard stuff, but it actually allows people, especially in a post-pandemic world, to start kind of experiencing what their house might look like. Display homes, I think, are going to struggle in the coming months. We've already been contacted by a bunch asking about virtual homes and so forth. That leads into stakeholder engagement. So one thing about all of these is that this is really about your stakeholders. And for me, a very expensive virtual model versus a decision which could cost you millions down the line because your executive didn't understand the information well enough. Yeah, it's a big question. Leasing and showrooms, it kind of relates to, the virtual display homes and showrooms. VR user testing. So I might kind of jump into this one really quickly. And this one's fun. So we've actually just run a project doing this similar thing to this recently. So this is a standard. So this is New South Wales State Hospital Standard Operating Theatre. So this has all of the bits and pieces they want to be able to roll out to any state hospital that is built in the coming decade or so. So equipment, placements, and so forth. What they currently do when they build a hospital, as I'm sure a bunch of you kind of are aware if you work on those types of projects, is they often prototype these rooms for real. So they go to a field somewhere before the hospital is built. They actually build these spaces, rent the equipment, get it in, get the nurses and the doctors to come in and actually perform a surgery or a simulated surgery in reality. And then they say, actually, can you move the gantries a little bit? We need a little bit more space for the doors. When we kind of wheel in our patients, we need to understand that there's got to be a turning circle for the bed. So they actually get to test these spaces in reality. This is essentially attempting to limit that cost. So allow them to do less of those physical prototypes and do more of the virtual prototypes. So I think it's a bit of a combination between two. I think you still want some physical prototyping, but in reality, you can actually do a lot, and you can have a single physical prototype, which is represented by a lot of virtual spaces, which is a really cool concept when you start thinking about it. What's more, this then leads very much into the digital twin. So once we've made this, it now exists. It's quite possible, and we've done this already with various things, is to take this screen and actually link it up to the real screen in the hospital that you eventually build. So you continue to get continued use and outputs from your virtual model. At that point, inductions and safety training, or even better, actually run a live operation. Have your nurses, have your doctors, and then you can have students from around the world put on their virtual reality headsets and jump into the operating theater, or actually be streaming real information on these screens and through the devices. So you can see in real time how this is operating, and even go back in time and record it to see why and where things might have gone wrong. So these become very useful tools long term. I'm not saying we can do all of that now, because each of those has its own output, but similar to Barangaroo, it's been 35 projects. Once you have that base environment, it's possible to continue on. This was another one recently that we did. So this is, we did this for education, actually. We've been talking to a few kind of tunnel boring specialists since and trying to get them to use it, but they're slow, they're construction people. So what this is a tunnel boring machine, an actual tunnel boring machine based on kind of real diagrams and from the company, and it's information filled. So you can use this in virtual reality and a headset and so forth. You can jump between locations, and you can actually get a real sense of what a tunnel boring machine looks like. This is interactive in nature, so it's really similar to a webinar. This is built for 11 people, 1 presenter and 10 participants, who essentially all jump in the space at once and start exploring what it's like. We did this because construction management students are making life and death decisions about these machines, and they've never even been in one. To get into one of these machines, there's a lot of red tape to get through, because they're big, dangerous, scary places. It's like having an entire building on its side kind of inching through the ground. And so this allows, first, second, third year students, and even kind of professionals, be inside a machine and experience what it's like for the workers that are actually making decisions about these things, so they can make better decisions at the front end. So it's a really interesting project. It was a lot of fun to do. Very cool. I've never actually kind of been in a tunnel boring machine, and it's frightening. These are scary, frightening, dense places with big moving machinery that kind of can kill you. Really fun. So, but yeah, so that was a really cool little project. Also
Jeremy?
design review. Yep.
There was a question a couple minutes back, and maybe a good time.
Yep.
But it's going to be the time. So from Karen Kenzik, she's one of our friends here in LA. She's a professor over at USC, and quite on, I guess, although I didn't go there, so fuck them. No, that's a joke. I love USC. They're great. Or their football coach. So let's see the full question. I'm not sure I get it, and it might be that we have her ask that you made a point on the graph that productivity is down in construction, and then talking about you did some stuff for free, and then your technical productivity per cost is up. I guess you said it's not really a question, but I mean, can you speak to the that graph a little bit more, and what you mean?
Yeah, I'm
about
just about to get there. Yeah, I'm just about to get there. Yeah.
Cool.
So yeah, so just let me finish, I guess, the example. So design review and approval. So I think the virtual environments are really good for this. This is what we're currently doing with things like Enscape. So if you use Revit, I'm sure you use Enscape, and it's a really nice kind of interim tool for people that understand the information to essentially engage with this. I think that we're not really doing enough of this, and I think the best tools we have are things like Enscape, which are really awesome, but they're not presenter focused. They're not actually focused on really fulfilling your client expectations. They're more kind of giving experts a better way to see their own information. So I think there's a product line, if you like, or something there which needs to be developed. Design sequencing and phasing, I think this is less about doing it in kind of like synchro or like any of the kind of other ways to, or Navisworks or something like that. And it's actually more about phasing for community engagement and executive engagement. So not every single bolt and detail, but it's about saying these are the main features and this is exactly what it's going to look like in effect to your surrounding context. And that's actually really important to councils and people that don't understand what we do as an industry. BIM for FM. So this is essentially your digital twin. So this leads into that. Now that is a much broader discussion, which I can go into at another time. And then this idea of mobility, that these virtual environments fall kind of fundamentally into the kind of, I guess, mobility sense. At the core of this, all of these environments, because it's like gaming, they link into user-focused data sets. So just like a game environment or kind of World of Warcraft has sets of data which are related to clans and outfits and kind of raids and all so forth. We have data sets related to floor plans and kind of displays and conferences and so forth. And so we can actually start applying those using data sets. Once you have these environments, it leads into like long-term change management, which is changing training and inductions. This can be done for infrastructure size projects. So I actually see this building from a ground up type approach, not, hey, let's build the whole city, but rather let's kind of build a building at a time and get it all working together, to urban planning and eventually to this whole concept of smart cities. And that's where I kind of see all this information going. Now, back to the interesting thing. So this is the construction productivity. This is the problem. Now, what this means, or what I've picked up from this. Now, this is a lot of opinion here. So this is, this is fairly recent data and so forth, but this is, I think, important in terms of where we're going into it. So individually or in silos, we're productive. So what that Australian data shows is that, yeah, we're great. We're powerhouses. That you and me, and like when we actually do things at an individual level, we're great. And that question just asked before, that actually is really pertinent to this discussion, because that free work is what we inherently do in our industry. We all do it. We basically, and I see designers, I see friends, I see colleagues do it all the time. We work just that extra hour. We work until late at night. We don't get paid for it. And we deliver the best design resolution. And we can't help ourselves because we know that there's a better solution. The budget only allows us to go up to here. But then if we just did a little bit more, it's just going to be that much better. And we just cannot help ourselves. And I can't, because I want the content to be good. I want the end product to be the best it can be. Then value engineering hits in. And essentially, that's where I see this happen. Collectively, we're unproductive. So what that leads to, so that each one of us doing all of that kind of, concentrating, getting that little, just adding that little bit extra, collectively across the whole industry actually leads to a productivity decline. Because, and a really good example, I was talking to someone from ACOM, a very big company, about this, and they just recently developed a little BIM tool for their guys. And what it was doing was essentially reviewing contractor models, assessing them, and looking at when and where and how work was placed. Really cool little tool. I think he's gone out and started a business with it, in fact, so you might come across it. And it makes huge efficiencies. And so I was talking about this with him, and he said, bullshit, because I've got this thing, and I've got a guy, one of my team, who used to spend about a day doing a full review, and now he can do 20 in a day. So he is now 20 times more productive because of this one little piece of technology that I've created. And I guess I argued the point of, well, where are you pulling that from? And what it eventually came down to after a lot of discussion is that product, that need, essentially puts the onus on all of the designers and all of the contractors to better their models in order to deliver it to him in the format he needs so he can make those productivity gains. So in order for that one person to make that productivity gain, you actually lose productivity in other areas. And it happens so subtly and across the board, and then is predicated on the fact that we're all just going to put a little bit of extra time in with our own effort, that it adds up. When you actually try to justify and cost the entire industry, it looks like we're unproductive, because we are, and it's largely because of technology. So, and I'll contextualize this some more. So, do you know how many pieces of software we use in our industry? Jay, do you know?
I actually do know, but that's really just it's a rough number, and based on a conversation that you and I had, is you're laughing
That's
will
right.
attest.
So anyway,
3,000.
over 3,000 over 3,000 and counting. Now, what is really interesting? Why do we have so many pieces of software? Other industries, on average, have a handful. You know, medicine. I think I've asked this question of lots of doctors, and there's 5, maybe 8 globally that they use, and they sum up pretty much every medical industry and kind of professional you can use. They have 8 pieces of software. We have 3,000. It's insane. And what it's come down for me is we're actually just too smart for our own good. We're actually so good at this, and this now links into that innovation generator kind of thing, is that we can't help ourselves. We just cannot do it. Every discrete problem has its own solution, and our industry is inherently designed solutions. So we know, even though there's a piece of software that will do it, that I could do it better and more efficiently. And so we do. And we make a lot of profit on that one particular project, but it's drawn from other places. For instance, that's your efficiencies now. So that big developer who's now done this has probably put a bunch of small companies out of business because they just can't compete with it. So what we're essentially doing is cannibalizing our industry constantly in a never-ending cycle of essentially, I can do this better than you and you can do this better than me, and we never actually capture the value. What we get is we get manufacturing come in and go, that's a fucking great idea. I'm going to take that and I'm going to apply that to my Toyota factory in 1986 or whatever it was, and I'm going to get massive productivity gains from that one solution that you created. And that's essentially where we lose our value. Now, and you can see this. You can see this because overall, we are still increasing. So, and that's where I start questioning how we're actually interpreting the data. And this is where I actually question BIM, because data is interpretable. And so the more data we get, the more information we pump into a model, making it LOD 500, the more questions we have about it. So once you get to a LOD 500 BIM, which is an as-built, but maybe not an as-built the day after once the building has settled a little bit, I have a million questions, literally a million. I have that, why is that bolt there? How do I change this? And I've got a really good example of this. So the digital twin. I don't know if you guys have heard of Willow over there, but Willow is kind of a big thrusting company now in the digital twin space. So one of their kind of keynote projects was for Global Switch, a data center company in Australia. Well, they're global, but anyway. But they did a full digital twin, and it's great. It's an as-built, it's fully recognized. They've been working on it for years, many systems integrated, the whole kit and caboodle. Now, I was talking to the facilities manager, and he had an air handling unit which needed to be fixed. 4 bolts. Now, the air handling unit has, it's a different model. It's been a couple of years, so the model has been updated. So he has it sitting there on the floor, ready to be fixed. He can crane it up and have it done in about an hour. Instead, he has to trigger a work order. That work order now gets sent down the line to the BIM modelers who model the new, or go see if the manufacturer has a model already, integrate it, and then do a whole new clash detection just to be sure that the new model doesn't clash with anything else. That all gets verified, sent through the executive, kind of ticked off and so forth. And 2 weeks later, he still has a broken air handling unit and people on level 14 still aren't getting air conditioning. That's the outcome of essentially what this all looks like. And so that's where we actually start losing value as we apply complexity. So the more complex we make our systems, the more effort we have to put into actually pulling valuable insights out of our systems, rather than just letting them be. And so for me, this is the leak. There must be a leak somewhere, either for real or in how we interpret the value of the output from our industries. And I think that's really key. I think that what we're doing here is we're valuing buildings as an asset. We're valuing them as a thing that I put onto a plot of land, and that's the value. But that's depreciating. It's fundamentally depreciating. We know that buildings deteriorate over time. They get more expensive to maintain. So what we are creating on our plots of land are fundamentally depreciating assets. But that's not really true because, again, you flip back to this graph. What we see here is we've actually made the world better by building that building, by coming up with that solution, that we've essentially and somehow propagated a concept across the world which has made a better society. Productivity in manufacturing, you name it. You can point to a million different things. The thing is, it's never attributed to our industry because we're just hard workers. So other industries essentially gain benefits from the application of our technological solution. And that's essentially the reality of this thing. So I didn't change that bottom quote.
What you're saying,
and when,
I mean, it's part of what you're saying, not what you're saying, but just, you know, a small part, that that our unproductivity is still affecting positive change, so can be looked at as, I mean, a more broad societal positive impact, even though the specific impact and a personal impact to our little industry being inefficient and losing money and wastefulness and all of that. But when we step back and look at it on the what we've really brought to the globe through what we do, no matter how inefficiently and no matter how many times we draw fucking lines instead of modeling the piece or whatever, you know, looking at the wrong data, it's still a net positive for greater humanity.
That's correct. It's just not linked to our industry. Or maybe a better way to put that term is we are not adequately capturing the value of what we're actually outputting. And it's really simple, and it has to do with depreciating buildings, because what the asset that we create is a building. So look at this in terms of video games or movies, for instance. You might spend $100 million making a movie or a video game. So what you get is a digital content which you can sell 1 billion times. So it's scalable in that sense. And so the question really is, what parts of our buildings are scalable? And it's not the building. The building is fundamentally not scalable. Like, we try to make it scalable through things like modular design and so forth, but it fails horribly again and again and again because sites are different. So the value of the building is not the building itself, even though that's how we're currently valuing it across the world. The value is in the social impact of the site. And that's different for every site. And I'll give you a really good example of that. The Sydney Opera House is one of the best examples in the world. This building is completely unviable. If you tried to cost up building the Sydney Opera House right now, not a single person anywhere in the world is even going to vaguely, they're all going to look at you like you're mad. But that building now represents $1.5 billion annual revenue in terms of tourism. So the real value of what we do is actually the social interactions and the impact of that space over time, not the building itself. And that's lost to our industry. We don't capture that. Yet it's a direct result of our design thinking and the environments that we created. And we lose it. We move on to the next project and build another one. So the real question is, you know, our industry seems to be the idea generator. The value just really isn't a question to us. Now, don't worry. We've got a solution. So the world has looked at us and told us we can fix this for you. Manufacturing has come back to us and said, don't worry, we've got it working now. We're going to fix your industry. And so what have we done? We've made an international standard for BIM. Done. Has anyone read this? Have you read it, Jay?
I cannot say I've read it all the way through.
Oh, it's painful, isn't it?
But I mean, I've looked at a lot of the different copies through the years, and what I love is that they have it worked out so well down to the last object, theoretically. And everybody, the more and more you learn about it, and I would say I'm kind of in the middle of my full understanding, yeah. But the people that go from there and get really deep into it, and you know, a lot of the British folks who have been implementing it for a few years, the people who really know about it say, yeah, and it's broken. And here are the 48 places where it's broken.
Mm-hmm. And
so,
well, it's actually broken.
It's broken, you know.
Mm-hmm. But
wonder why we.
Yeah, but standards are fundamentally broken because they change too slowly to keep up with how fast design happens, or just thinking happens in general. Standards worked as an idea back in the 50s and 60s or 40s and 30s when we had time. These days, with new ideas changing, you cannot wait 2 years for a new standard to come out. It's insane and stupid, in my opinion. We need standards to be flexible, dynamic, and changing pretty much on a daily basis. Like, and that's and what that requires is a rethinking of what standards are. Now, kind of finish on this, because this is, for me, what really kind of sums this up. Has anyone ever read this? So this is the American National Standards, the safety code and requirements for a dry martini. Now, these guys knew how to write a standard. So I suggest to anyone that kind of is interested in BIM standards and thinking about how we actually apply things like design thinking to a standard model. Oh, that doesn't work unless you take a much more qualitative approach. So at the moment, we're looking at buildings instead of quantities. We say how many quantities, what does it cost? I'm going to build it. How much effort? How long is it going to last for? When do I knock it down? It's all quantities. Buildings are not quantitative, in my opinion. They're qualitative. And especially now when we're starting to get to the point where we're trying to standardize concepts around BIM, because BIM involves fundamentally two halves. And those two halves are a dichotomy between the representational model and the underlying data. And we've lost the concept of the representational model, because representational model allows for a lot of things to happen. This turns into cultural sensitivities, genders, bias, like all these things actually start affecting the model. And it's what we're actually not getting in there. We're not getting the social impact into what our BIM are. So, and this links back to what I said. Currently, we use BIM or our technology to make things as we imagine that they're going to be. What we don't do is we don't make things in a way that encapsulates how they're going to be used. And that's really important, because that's actually the long-term value of what our industry does, as noted by, Sydney Opera House, or maybe more generally, culturally significant sites. So, and that might be a murder. It might be a psychopath killer. It might be the birth of the next Messiah, whatever. The point is that location has relevance based on human interaction, not on the building itself. So that's where I kind of go. Now, finishing it off, kind of wrapping it all up, there are actions. And so it sounds very philosophical and large, and, there's this big thing. And I think you can't just change this. You can't just say, hey, this is how we feel, let's fix it. There are a few things, however, I think we could get to. One of them, which I was I think floated with Jay the other day, was this idea of like a Hippocratic oath. Our industry doesn't have it. So in a sense, there's no link to the long-term output of my design decisions. I don't care. As long as I get paid, fine. Doctors, for instance, have this thing that it's an oath. It's linked to their profession, but it's about them saving people. And I think that we should have something similar in our industry. And I think it would probably solve problems like, dodgy practices in India. All of a sudden, if you had an oath about a desire to basically better this aspect, then it would probably solve those problems. Even that's too big and too hard. So don't worry about going there. I think there's a bunch of steps we can get there, and it's through the use of virtual environments, and it's actually reducing how much work we do. I think we can use less effort to deliver the same thing in a better way. And so in terms of this, apply a virtual lifecycle model approach to building content. And to do that, utilize visualization budgets to create a digital asset. So everything that you've seen that I've done has all been done on existing budgets. In fact, I've got to claw and fight for any budget at all, at any point, even though I can show millions of dollars savings on multiple projects. People don't want to spend money on visualization. So what I suggest is flip that. So spend the money on visualization into a virtual model. Take a bit of a hit in the quality of the visualization, because it's not going to be your beautiful single image, but you're going to get 500 images as opposed to one. So you're going to have to rethink your marketing strategy a little bit, but I guarantee more content is better than a single amazing piece of content. And if you really need it, you can still make the amazing piece of content. So you'll actually find the budget probably exists to do both. So extend the value of the digital asset by incrementally developing the virtual asset through the life of the building. And when I say the life of the building, I mean really the life. You have to think about this long term. And when you think long term, that means you need to take a bit of an open data approach. What technologies are coming out tomorrow? What new Facebooks are going to be here? And I need to make my system open enough and flexible enough not to be stuck in time, because people live in it and people are going to retrofit it. So the more flexible I make my back-end systems, and it's the same in design. This is why we like flexible spaces and, like reconfigurable spaces. The same applies to the virtual model, except even more so, and engage as broad an audience as possible. So I think this is the key to the whole thing, is that we're a closed book to the rest of the world. You know, what we do is really awesome and amazing, and it confuses and scares people. Now, if you get a marketer come in and shift your budget to 25% marketing, or even 15% marketing for that project, you're going to have the cash to convince everyone that you know what you're doing. It's kind of that simple and stupid. It's what politicians do. We are terrible in our industry at doing it. We think that people are going to look at our technical information and know what we're talking about. All they do is look at our technical information and go, holy shit, you guys don't know what you're talking about. Have you ever looked at BIM? That's the most confusing shit in the world. And I've literally had this conversation with people. I've had people come into our industry from outside and say, look, I'm doing a GIS kind of project and I've got this BIM file. Can you help me kind of put the two together? That starts a huge conversation, because they go, right, well, why don't you just standardize the industry? And it's like, do you fucking know what design is? So the issue here is really broad. What we need to do is we need to basically just show the good shit that we do and stop showing all the technical stuff. Let people believe we can do it.
And
so,
Jeremy, I want to kind of insert a question here, which I think speaks to that. I believe, let me see. Obed Ortiz from Gensler asked a bit ago. And by the way, you're very welcome for the webinar, and thank you, Jeremy, for spending time and everybody who's cluing in. He asked, ultimately, how is this advancing construction? And I think these actions that we can take are the things that are starting to be that answer of what we can do.
That's right. Yeah, so and like maybe to extend on that a little bit, we have found builders to be the hardest people to engage with. So across the board, we engage with every contractor, every type of person. Builders are the hardest ones, because builders, they're actually the ones that really rationalize this quantifiably. So actually making it make sense for them is the hardest thing. What I have seen, and it's only a few, and it's the builders which are starting to understand the value of the virtual model, is that it can actually reduce the onus on them to get things right. Maybe that's not quite the...
Your audio went out there for a second.
Nope.
Your audio jumped out for you're back. Yep. It just jumped out when you said that's not the case. So I just want to make sure you get that.
Cool. Yeah. So what I'm finding there is that the builders, they're the ones that, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. So we can actually reduce their work. So what I was about to ask is, what's more useful to a builder? A LOD 500 BIM or a visual model which shows the guy on site who doesn't know how to look at a LOD 5 BIM what it actually looks like? And it's really that simple. And what we're doing at the moment is we're providing LOD 500 BIMs to guys that go, oh, mate, I just got to site and I've got my phone, it's not working. That's the guy that's actually building your very complicated building. And that's what we're not taking into account. So what I'm talking about is making it so fucking simply obvious for that guy. You actually remove the need to have the LOD 500 BIM. Once that guy at that level understands what he's talking about, and that guy's probably been doing his job for 30 years, the thing is a translation or a communication issue, that you show them a LOD 500 BIM and you're actually showing them too much information. You're making assumptions about how they're going to put the thing together when you don't know how they think. So I guess what I'm suggesting here is that there's a way that we can use visual information to meet the expectation point and push the actual physical labor or the technical labor into the background. What we're doing with Revit and BIM at the moment and our entire process is we bring forward the technical complexities, and that actually just confuses the situation. So look, it's a subtle difference, and the best way to see it work is actually engage us for a project and go, oh wait, why did that go all so well? Because it's just about clarity.
Love it.
So, okay, yeah, that's pretty much it, and that's where I kind of end this thing. For me, it really is about sharing the information. And this comes down to like how many people actually know that we have these models. They don't. You go talk to most people in your modern buildings right now, and they don't know even though it's there. Your BIM is excuse me. Your BIM is literally sitting on a hard drive. At best, it's being used in a digital twin rollout by 5 or 10 facilities managers and asset managers. What I'm suggesting is that they're not the people that matter. If you're thinking about long-term engagement with this building, I'll finish this on Meg on one really kind of facetious point. What do you think the most asked question in a building is? Jay? You know. But
wow, I mean, where's the restroom?
that's exactly it. It is the single most asked question in every single building across the board. So
what do I win?
What do you win? You win the industry, or you win an insight. You win an insight into how virtual models actually can be used. So let's take your grandmother coming to your very nice 40-story building that you work on the 33rd story of. They come in and they need to go to the toilet, and they go to the front desk and they go, "Hi, I need to go to the toilet," and the concierge goes, "No problem. It's up the escalator, second on your left." And your grandmother looks really confused because they're scared. They don't come to big buildings often and so forth. So what happens is the concierge takes your grandmother to the toilet because it's all about brand and image and treating people nice and so forth. So that person has spent 15 minutes of their day showing your grandmom where the toilet is, which is a necessary activity. However, that happens in every building across the board. Virtual models are not for your asset managers and your facilities managers. They're actually for your grandmom. They're to show the really basic functions of buildings to people in a way that we can reduce the need for information flow, and we can spend more time on interaction. Yeah, that's where it is. To finish, book chapter. So all of this is somewhat predicated on this concept of open data. So all of this falls down when proprietary data becomes a thing. So in order to make all of these systems work and all this information shared, so my biggest problem as a company is that I have everyone else's IP. So in my models, I have your families, and not the actual development or the parametrics of it, but in some sense, I've taken the geometry of all of these various pieces of things. So, and it's a really big question in our industry, essentially, where does the IP, or where is the intellectual property of the companies related to a BIM? And it's a question that's never been answered because they're so collaborative, that these things have so much intellectual property from so many different people in them. It actually begs the question, what is IP? And so for me, open data is the most important aspect of where we're going. And to get to the types of future I'm talking about, we actually have to embrace that. And it's only through the embracing of open data that we actually get the outcomes which lead to, I think, the value capture which I've been talking about. Anyway, that's me in a nutshell. Thank you.
Let me unmute this time. Thank you very much, Jeremy. Consider this a rousing round of applause from the whole group. And it's really interesting, and definitely want to keep the conversation going into the future, especially after the lockdown. You know, I'll be able to take off my mask. Let me just check real quick if there are any other questions. Let's see. Let me just read them. So, just a second here. Shobit, do you have anything right now? We'd like to thank Shobit and
some comments.
What's that?
I said, no, there's just some comments in the questions, nothing. I think you've answered most of them.
Okay, cool. Yep. Our group is a nice commenter, and they, but I think, you know, a lot of what you say is really, I mean, there was like at least 30 times I wanted to switch away and like quote you on Twitter, and then you said something else. I was like, fuck. It's some really profound and a lot of ideas in there, and a lot of what we can do. There we go. We got to get back to the get the mouth moving. No, you know, there's a lot of fundamental ideas and some really broad strokes that kind of glossed over very quickly.
There are. Each one of them is a talk in itself, a lot of them. So
easily, right, hours in the research. But the big thing I think that I take away from it is the irony in that we're such an unproductive, wasteful industry, and we have generated a lot of other industries' success and productivity. I mean, that's just fucking brilliant and hilarious. But as well last time, and maybe next time we'll kind of broach this subject. Oh, the real nose. We'll broach this one, but about the curve. Who's going to make it through this technology shift that we're having? Who's really going to make it through? And I've long said, where are all the hand drafters? Well, 99.99999% of them are gone. They're either doing digital architecture or they're selling insurance or something else wonderful. Right now, we have so many architects and engineers and everybody else in the industry and contractors, and where there's a culture of profound mediocrity and not wanting to continuously get better, not wanting to become the first chair violinist, not wanting to become the best football, baseball, whatever player that they possibly can be. And it's just like in those other industries, the ones that do focus on that do try for that, I think are the ones that are not only going to be more successful, but in every downturn, whenever there's an impact, a global economy impact, which we're about to, or we're going to have another one that'll last another fucking 8 to 10 years. Hopefully it's another step in the evolution of more of the mediocrity can go and sell insurance or donuts or Starbucks or whatever they want to do. And the technology and the people that are actually applying the technology, let's say appropriately, like people like you and others, they're the ones. It's like the medium firm that goes to an all digital, all BIM, all correct modeling philosophy. They win the projects over the people that just jam AutoCAD on every fucking level and say, yeah, that's a BIM. So I just want to kind of leave with that comment and thank you for the time, and definitely want to do it again. So we're going.
Thanks very much.
We are recording this, and we will post the link, and so we'll let you know when it's up there. But again, thank you very much.
Thanks you. Thank you very much. Thanks everyone. Bye.
Yep, and thank everyone online who's here still. We're going to sign off now, so. If you have any questions, feel free to go hit the blog or whatnot. Oh, great. I just minimized the whole meeting. Go visit the blog, Twitter, ask questions on Twitter. You can find Jeremy's link there. And enjoy. Have a good week.
You too. Thanks everyone. See you later.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Shovit. We're done.